Saving America one entrepreneur at a time, it's the Biz Rap Podcast with your host, Michael Manahan.
It's Biz Rap Radio, the show that celebrates entrepreneurs and small business with your host, small businessman, educator, and author, Michael Manahan.
And welcome to another edition of Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. Thank you so much for joining me today. Biz Rap Radio, we are the show all about small business and entrepreneurs. Yes, we're here helping small business people in America and entrepreneurs do what they need to do, which is, of course, run their businesses, expand and grow their businesses, create employment, and make a profit. Yeah. Hey, now, I know that there's those folks in Washington and Sacramento would have you think that they create all the jobs. You know, I was listening to this radio commercial by Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles. I guess we're up for an electoral race here in Los Angeles, and the mayor is advertising, which of course he's got every right to do, but he's bragging in his ad about creating jobs. Yes, the mayor of Los Angeles has created jobs. The reality is governments don't create jobs. Businesses create jobs. Well, okay, let's face it, the government does employ people, and if you're talking about that, if you're talking about the direct people who work for the government, you know, whether they work for the city hall or the various government agencies, perhaps they work for the school board or they work for the police department. Yes, of course, the government creates those jobs because it decides how many police or how many teachers you're going to have. But the idea that the government is somehow responsible for creating the jobs that businesses create is just, absolutely ludicrous. The reality is businesses create jobs. And why do businesses create jobs? It's real simple. It's a pure economics. It's nothing more complicated than that. Businesses create jobs in order to serve their customers, in order to deliver the products and services the business needs to deliver, in order to charge the customer for those products and services and hopefully make a profit off of that customer. It's as simple as that. You got more customers, you have a chance to grow your business, you have an opportunity to expand revenues, you're going to hire more people because it takes more people to do that. Now, of course, we understand some businesses are what's called labor intensive. That means it takes a lot more employees to run that business than another business in a different industry that can have the very same revenues but significantly fewer employees. But that is irrelevant to the discussion. The key part of the discussion is that businesses create jobs, and if the economy is doing well and there is demand for a business's products and services, then that business is going to hire people. It needs people to not just take care of the customers, it needs people in marketing, people in production, it needs people in the accounting department, it needs people everywhere. And the government doesn't create those jobs. The government doesn't walk into the office of the CEO of a business, walk into the office of the local dry cleaner and say, hey, you need to have 3 people working in the back. But they'd like to. That's the scary part. Yeah, they don't do that now, but believe me, they'd love to do it. They would just absolutely, they'd die for that. The ability to come into your business and say to you, hey, Bob, you got 5 people working in the kitchen in your burger joint. You really need 7 people. Yeah, and by the way, we're going to pass a law that gives us the authority to go out and force you to hire those extra people in your business. Why? Because we don't want people on with social assistance programs, or we don't want people without work. I think they had a word for this. I think it was called communism. And hey, a message to Washington and Sacramento. That didn't turn out so well. It's a failed program. The reality is that free markets are what create jobs for people. Businesses in free markets serving customers, that's what creates those jobs. speaking of jobs, one of the topics that is really dear to my heart because it causes so much aggravation for small business people is this whole idea of a contractor versus an employee. Now, it for I mean, I don't know. I've read a lot of history. I never read much back in the days of Queen Elizabeth the First. That there were some knights who were contractors and some knights who were employees, and never heard reading. I've done a lot of U.S. history back in the Wild West. Somebody had a ranch. I never heard that the rancher was concerned about whether the cowboy was an employee or the cowboy was a contractor. It didn't make any difference. What happened is if you were a business owner, if you owned a ranch, back in the 1800s, and you needed a couple of cowboys to round up the cows, you went out and you hired a couple of cowboys, and you said, you know what, I'll pay you whatever it was at the time, $1 a day, and I'll give you, you can sleep in the on the property. We got a place for the cowboys to sleep, and Mama's gonna brew up some stew every night. You can eat the stew, and that's your deal. And when you're finished working for us, we'll pay you your $1 a day, and you can be on your way, go off and work for somebody else. There was no terminology for something that was called a contractor or somebody was called an employee. Basically, somebody agreed to do some work for you, and you agreed to compensate them in some form or another. Now, through history, that has changed. Nowadays we typically compensate our employees just with cash, but back in the day, you may have compensated employees with food, with housing, with use of your livestock, with use of your land, even. And there was only two parties to such engagements. There was the person doing the hiring and the person being paid for his or her work. That was it. Simple. Now, all of a sudden, it's got so complicated. As small employees, we need to figure out who is an employee and who is a contractor. And by the way, if you cannot figure it out, just Google it. I did. I Googled employees versus contractors. I got 17 million results. There is accountants and attorneys and consultants and HR experts and tons of other people out there who, for a fee, will educate you on the difference between an employee and a contractor. And why does it even matter? Well, let's go back a little bit in history and figure out how this even started. Prior to 1940, individuals in the United States, you paid your taxes to the government in installments. The government, you got from your boss, you got a paycheck, whatever it might be, and it was your responsibility as a citizen to take a portion of your paycheck and send it off to Uncle Sam. That was your taxes. And that was the way it worked in the United States from the time they created income tax, way back in, 1910 or something, up until the 40s. And then some bright-minded individual in Washington, or maybe it was Sacramento, or maybe it was both, decided, it's really too much hassle to chase Bob and Sam and Jose and Carlos and all of the rest of the folks out there for their taxes. So we're going to do something. We're going to go force the employers to take that tax away from the employees and send it to us. Yeah, no, and you look, I'm not using words frivolously here. That's what they decided. We are going to force a small business to take away from an employee a portion of his or her earnings, and we are going to force that business to send that money to Washington on behalf of that employee. And by the way, if that small business person does not comply, if you hire somebody and you do not take tax off of their paycheck and send it to Washington, you are committing a crime. You are committed, just like you robbed a bank or you stuck a gun in somebody's chin and forced them to give, force that person to give you his or her wallet. You are committing a crime. And what are the penalties for that crime? Could be fines, could be jail time. They could actually take away your business. So yes, the government is forcing you to do this. So that takes us up to around the 1940s, when the government said, okay, now business people, you got to take money away from your employees and you got to send it to us here in Washington. Now, is that the end of the story? No, it's not the end of the story. There is more to come, and you're going to be amazed when you hear just how this whole contractor-employee thing has developed. But we're going to have to go for a commercial break. This is Mike Manahan, Biz Rap Radio, and we're going to be back right after these messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. Thanks again for being with me today. Hope you're enjoying the show. If you just tuned in, we are talking about this, one of the most aggravating things to small business people, and not just small business people, but big businesses as well. But it's particularly onerous on small business people because of the financial consequences. It is the concept of an employee versus a contractor, and we're going to get more into that in detail, but I've been giving a little bit of the history about the fact that when income tax first started way back in 1910 or 11, you voluntarily sent your income tax to the federal government. Your employer did not deduct it from your paycheck, and that went along very well for some 40 odd years or so. And then sometime in the 1940s, the government decided that it was too much hassle to try and collect taxes from Jose and Carlos and Mike and Bob and Sally and Heinrich and all the rest of the folks out there. So what they would do instead was force the employer to deduct that money from the employee's paycheck and send that money to Washington. And by the way, if you do not deduct that money, you could be subject to fines, you could go to jail, and the government could actually take your business away from you, shut down your business. Okay, so that's fine. So now we have a situation where sometime in the 40s, government says, okay, you cannot pay your employee the full amount of their paycheck. You can't give it to them. What you do have to do is you have to send some of us over here to some of that money. Even a little trickier. The government said, if you are going to hire an employee, we are going to charge you a tax. Yes, we're going to have a tax that we're going to charge you for the privilege of having an employee work for you. And of course, that's what's called payroll taxes. And by the way, a lot of your employees do not even know that you pay this. So you hire somebody for $2,000 a month, and or maybe more than that. That's a pretty low salary. Let's say you hire somebody for $4,000 a month. You're probably sending about $400 a month of your money to the federal government. They call it payroll taxes. They call it employers' contribution to Social Security and employers' contribution to Medicare and blah, blah, blah. But really what it is a tax on you as an employer. In other words, you are paying the federal government and the state government in many states for the privilege of hiring somebody. So you want to go out and hire Bob. You're going to hire Bob for $50,000 a year. The government says to you, yes, we will allow you to hire Bob for $50,000 a year, but we are going to charge you $5,000 for the privilege of hiring Bob, and you're going to have to send us that money. So in addition to the money you have to deduct from Bob's paycheck, we're going to charge you, the employer, a tax for the privilege of hiring Bob. And it's called, basically it's an employment tax. It's a tax on people that you employ. The more people you employ as a business, the more employment tax you are paying to the government for the privilege of having those people on your payroll. So, okay, we understand that. First off, you have an obligation as an employer to take money from your employees and pay it to the government. Secondly, the government says, okay, now, if you have an employee working for you, in addition to the money that you take from your employee's paycheck, you also have to pay us an employment tax. A tax on every one of your employees. It's kind of like, I think, in the cattle industry. If you got 10 head of cattle, you got to pay a little tax to the government for every one of your cows. I don't know if that's really the case, but I heard that somewhere. So what has happened since then is the government has attempted to define what an employee is. You see, we didn't have to do this before all of this money gouging on behalf of the government, because before, it didn't matter what you called the person. If you wanted somebody to work for you, you agreed to pay them in some form or another. They agreed to work for you, to do the work that was needed to be done, and it just happened. But now you have to decide, is the person that I want to hire to do some work for me, is that person a contractor, or is that person an employee? Hey, it's not that simple. This is really complicated stuff. And if you guess wrong, if you say, oh, that person is a contractor, not an employee, it could cost you a ton of money. Now, what's the difference? Well, if a person is an employee and they work for me, I have to deduct money from their paycheck. I have to pay an employment tax, and I have to send all that money to the government. If somebody is what we call an independent contractor, in other words, they're not an employee, then I don't have an employment tax, and I have no obligation to take their money and send it to the federal government. Well, of course, I mean, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to understand the government wants everybody who's hired to be an employee. Why? Because then you, the business owner, will deduct money from that employee's paycheck and send it to the government. Plus, you will pay the government for the privilege of hiring that person. You'll pay an employment tax. So the government doesn't want you having contractors. But the reality is, a lot of people out there work as contractors. Now, yes, and what we're specifically talking about here typically is small entrepreneurial people. Yes, small business people like you. If you hire, I don't know, a major corporation to do some work for you, there's no question that major corporation is an independent business. But today, many people really run their own little small independent businesses. There's accountants, there's consultants, there's graphic artists, there's people who do voiceovers on commercials, and they don't work full-time for a company. The time they work for a company varies. Sometimes a client might be 10% of their time. Sometimes a client could be 90% of their time. It's possible a client could be 100% of their time for a period of time. But the intention of those people is not to be an employee. It's to have their own independent little business, because they not only want to work for you, they want to work for other people. And by the way, I'm a huge supporter of people starting and creating small independent businesses like this. I think it's a great way for people to start off. You can either continue to be a one-man show, as we call it, or you could grow your business. Maybe if you get really busy, if you're a graphics artist, you hire another graphic artist who works for you. But there's nothing wrong with a one-man show business. There's nothing in the rule book that says if your business is just you, it's not a business. But the government doesn't like it. Why? Because the government wants the employer to deduct part of what is paid to you, and the government also wants the employer to pay that employment tax. So it becomes a little complicated. And here's the rub. If you don't get it right, if you think, hey, this person working for me, he's an independent contractor. I don't want him as an employee. He's going to work for me part-time as an example. I don't know what he's doing the rest of the time. It's not my concern. If you guess wrong and an auditor comes in from the government and they say, oh, hang on, Mr. Smith, that person you say is a contractor, we think that person is an employee. And that means all the money you should, or we think you should have deducted from that person's pay, we now want you to pay that. Oh, and in addition to that, we want you to pay all of those employment taxes that we think you should have paid on that person. And there's some fines in here for not doing it the way we wanted you to do it to begin with. And of course, there's some interest. And while you thought you were making a legitimate business decision that made sense to you as a business owner to hire Bob down the street as an independent contractor who's going to do some graphic artist work for you, the government says no, and you now have thousands and possibly tens of thousands of dollars that you owe to the federal government. And believe me, when you owe that money, they're ruthless. I mean, they can take away your business, they can shut your business down. It is just incredible what they can do to make your life miserable. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, contractors versus employees. How do you protect yourself? And what difference does it really make? Well, it makes a huge difference. This is Mike Manahan, Biz Rap Radio, and we'll be back with more right after these messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. Thanks again for joining me today. We are talking about the subject of employees versus independent contractors and what a nightmare this can be. And this is a nightmare for every business out there. And it's particularly onerous on the small business people, having to figure out whether somebody is an independent contractor or an employee. And we talked about how all of this started. It used to be back in the day, there was no such thing as there's no such thing as independent contractors. It wasn't even in the lexicon, if you will. I don't know. I use the example of a rancher, out in Kansas, and the rancher needed somebody to round up the cows. He hired a cowboy. He agreed to pay him $1 a day and give him a room in the shed out back and give them some food every night, and that was it. And when the cowboy was finished, he got paid off, and that was the end of the deal. But now the government has created, and yes, by the way, this is a concept that was created by the government. It did not exist until the government got involved. Why was it created? It was created for one simple reason. The government wants you, as an employer, to take money from the people you pay and send it directly to the government. In addition to that, the government wants to charge you, an employer, a tax on the people that work for you. Yeah, that's right. So for the privilege of having an employee, the government wants you to create jobs. They want you as a business to hire people. And by the way, we're going to tax you for the privilege of having employees. And if you don't follow all the rules correctly, well, you could be in deep do. Yeah, that's right. You could be subject to fines. You could go to prison. They could even take your business. So let's move on with this discussion about the contractor versus the employee. So what happened was, as the government set out rules as to who was a contractor and who was an employee, of course people got creative. And they figured out ways around those rules so you could continue to call people contractors. And there's a benefit for both the employee, or the person who's being employed, and the employer. Benefit for the employer: you don't have a lot of reporting requirements to the government. You don't have to deduct taxes. You don't have to pay the employment tax. The benefit for the employee: flexibility. I can get my paycheck, my money for doing my service. I can work for a number of different companies, and I can pay my own taxes according to my own tax schedule and how I want to pay them. But the IRS doesn't like it, so what's happened is they have increasingly restricted the definition of what is a contractor. And now you have to hit some very serious tests. I'm not going to go through them all, they're all online, you can check them out pretty easily. But you have to basically meet these tests in order for somebody to be called a contractor. And they're tricky. It's not all cut and dried, it's not perfectly clear. And again, none of this stuff really existed until the IRS got involved in it. And now today we have attorneys, accountants, consultants, IRS employees, taxing authorities, and others, and they discuss this issue as if it were a natural function of our economic system, when really it's about as logical as flying pigs. You know, the government created the distinction between employees and contractors. It has no natural source in either economics or business, and it exists solely to increase the bite the government takes out of the economy and to make it easier for the government to extract money from the taxpayers. And that's fine. Now, look, I have no problem with the government collecting taxes. By the way, notice I use the word tax. I notice a lot of government officials now don't talk about tax. They call it revenue. Yes, the government is generating revenue. No, it's not revenue, it's tax. Businesses generate revenue. Revenue is something that I get when I combine materials and labor and then I sell the end result at a profit to a willing buyer. That's revenue. Okay, taxes are just taxes, but that's another issue. The thing here is that I am clear the government needs to generate taxes. I mean, somebody's got to pay for it. We could argue back and forth, are the taxes too high? Are they too low? Does the government spend them on the right things? But that's not the discussion here. The government has come up with a methodology of collecting its taxes that is oppressive, and it is particularly oppressive on small business people. Yeah, for the big corporations, General Motors, Citibank, all of these big companies, they've got armies of accountants and attorneys, and they can spend hours and hours, if not days, complying with all of the rules and regulations. In fact, a lot of the big corporations love these rules and regulations because they know small businesses have a hard time complying with them, and so therefore it gives them a competitive advantage. Hey, if I'm a big corporation, I can hire an army of nerds to manage all of the compliance issues that the government puts on us. But, if you're a little small business, if you're a pizza joint, you got 10, 12 employees, it is really tough to be on top of all of these government regulations and being, in compliance with them all. So, today businesses are paying, I'm going to call it employee privilege taxes. We're basically paying fines and penalties for misclassifying workers under an artificial and bogus classification system. It's a bogus system, contractors versus employees. Paying consultants, advisors, and experts to provide guidance on compliance and wasting management resources trying to figure this all out, rather than allowing management to focus on building the enterprise, on innovation and wealth creation, which is what business owners should be doing. How much lost, I'm going to call it lost wealth creation occurs in this country because small business people are busy sitting around spending their money on consultants and tax authorities and advisors and accountants trying to figure out who's an employee and who's not an employee. Shouldn't those business people really be trying to figure out what the next products and services that they're going to provide to their customers, working on innovations and creativity? Wouldn't that be far better spent than working on, figuring out who's an employee and who's a contractor? And of course, I spent a lot of time on this issue because it is a big issue, but I'm only scratching the tip of the iceberg here. This is one rule. This is one rule amongst tens of thousands of rules that small business people in the United States must comply with, must obey, And if they don't, again, the penalties vary, but it certainly includes fines. It includes, for some of the rules and regulations, going to jail, and some of the rules and regulations, the government could actually come in and grab your business, take your business away from you. Now, what sense does that make? So, the show here is, we're not a political show. We're not supporting Republicans or Democrats, but if Donald Trump is listening to me today, if anybody in the government is listening to me today, Jerry Brown up in Sacramento, I don't know, I'm here in the city of Long Beach, Mr. Mayor Robert Garcetti, or Garcia, not Robert Garcetti, Robert Garcia, the mayor of Long Beach. If you are listening, remember something. You're not creating jobs. It's the businesses that are creating jobs, and businesses will create jobs, and they will create more jobs if you get off our back. If you stop requiring us to comply with complex rules and regulations, and if you force down our throats things like, the contractor versus the employee, which is about as bogus a concept you could ever come up with. It's something created for no other purpose than to allow the government to reach into people's pockets. So, look, if you're listening to me, be careful about this. If you don't do the classifications right, you could be in big trouble. It could cost you a lot the day the government walks in and decides to audit you. But in addition to complying with the rules and regulations about contractors and about employees, drop your senator, drop your congressman, drop your local representative, the mayor of your city. Send a message to these people that it is dysfunctional to force this kind of regulation down the throats of small business people, the people who are out there day in, day out, creating the jobs and keeping this old American economy rolling. This is Mike Manahan. I'm your host, Biz Rap Radio, and we're going to be back right after these messages. Welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. Thanks again for joining me today. I hope you're enjoying the show. We've been talking about the issue of employees versus contractors, and about the concept that the contractor, the differentiation was simply created by the federal government as a methodology of extracting money from the citizens of the country. I mean, that's really what it amounts to. There's no logical basis in business or economics for the contractor versus the employee distinction. And we went over that in quite a lot of detail. If you missed it, go to the archives, go to KCAA 1050, and you can check out the archive shows, or you can go to bizrap.org. That's bizrap.org. You can listen to this show as well as all of our archived shows. But there's something I want to finish off the show with, and that is talking about illegal immigration. Now, I find it very interesting. And again, I want to say that we are not a political show here. We don't support Democrats. We don't support Republicans. We are a show that's all about small business and how do you help small businesses and how do small businesses survive and prosper, because my belief is, and I think the belief of a lot of economists, is that small business is one of the driving forces in America. We are a country of small businesses. Most people work for a small business. As we pulled out of the recession, most new jobs were created by small businesses. But illegal immigration is a topic that to me is extremely important for a few reasons. One is because the government puts a huge onerous burden on small businesses with respect to hiring illegal immigrants, and to me this is the absolute epitome of hypocrisy. Here's the situation: if an illegal immigrant gets across that border, however they get here, overstay their visa, they sneak across the border, I don't know, they parachute in from outer space, but somehow they manage to get into this country. They now have a host of benefits provided to them by the federal government. They can qualify, and by the way, state governments, they can qualify for food, for housing, for education, for medical care, and a host of other services, complements of the United States government, at least one branch or another of that government. However, if that same person comes to your doorstep as a small business person and asks for a job and agrees to exchange their labor in an honest transaction for a fair wage, you, my friend, are a criminal. Yes, and you could lose your business. You could go to jail. You could be fined by the government for taking care of that illegal immigrant. So if you take care of the illegal immigrant, that's it. You're a crook and a criminal. You could lose your business. If the government takes care of the illegal immigrant, well, that's wonderful. Now, what if you decide to defy the government? Well, we have sanctuary cities in the United States that are defying the federal government. Federal government doesn't seem to be doing anything about them. But if you defy the federal government and decide that you are going to give basically shelter and clothing and food and education and health care to an illegal immigrant in the form of a paycheck, you're in big doo-doo, my friend. You could lose your business, go to jail, be fined huge amounts of money. And so the hypocrisy there, to me, is unbelievable. Why is it the federal government expects the small business people of America to be its police force when the police forces of the cities and counties in this country themselves, many of them, will not obey federal law and will not enforce the immigration laws? It is and look, I'm not saying you should go out there and hire a bunch of illegals. And in fact, I really think you should hire Americans. But why should it be on you to figure out who's legal? Why is it up to me? You know, there's a form called an I-9, which I think everybody listening to the show who's a business person understands. It's a form you have to fill out if you hire somebody. And one of the purposes is to make sure that person is authorized to work in the United States of America. Yeah, and in the process of filling out that I-9, which you do so at peril. By the way, the instruction book on how to complete an I-9, you can download it off the IRS's website. 78 pages long. Yeah, 78 pages long on how to fill out 2 pages. And by the way, that person who's coming to you looking for a job, well, that person can provide you with 32 different types of identification. And you are supposed to know whether or not those different pieces of identification make that person eligible to work in the United States of America or not. Why is small business being burdened with this? I'm sorry, but I just don't get it. I don't see why it is that I, as a small business person, have to play police officer. Maybe what I should start doing is running around with a uniform and carrying a 38 revolver at my side and a pair of handcuffs. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. I'm a small business person. Many of you out there listening are small business people. What you want to do is manage your business. You want to hire people to do work. You don't want to be a police officer. And again, the cities and the police departments around the country are defying the very rules of our government, and yet the government's expecting you and me as small business people to play police officer. One other thing. I've heard so many politicians, and not just politicians, but radio announcers and pundits and commentators, they say, well, we should use the E-Verify system. If we just use E-Verify, it won't be a problem. Well, they don't know how E-Verify works. the reality is you cannot use E-Verify until you hire somebody. So it doesn't stop you from hiring an illegal, because you cannot use the E-Verify system until you actually have that person on the payroll. Yes, you can't just check out their Social Security, and if their Social Security number is not valid, don't hire them. No, you have to hire them first. Now here's the rub. Once you hire them, you use E-Verify to check out their Social Security. If their Social Security number is no good, you can't fire them. In fact, if you do fire them, you could be subject to anti-discrimination laws and fined up to $10,000. It's right on the E-Verify website. It's crazy. You have to give that person, that employee who has a fake Social Security number, you have to give that person months and months and months to actually prove that they are eligible, that they really can work in the United States, that it was just a mistake, that somehow they got their number wrong, and on and on. It is the biggest bag of foolishness on the planet. It's unbelievable that the government come up with a system. Yeah, here's how the system should work. Before I even hire the guy, I key in the Social Security number. If it's not a valid Social Security number, I don't hire the guy. But again, why am I even worrying about that? Why is it my role as a business owner to figure out who's eligible to work in this country and who's not eligible to work in this country? I got enough problems. I'm trying to manage marketing and production and human resources and take care of my customers. I got to play police officer on behalf of the federal government of the United States? I mean, they can't even do their jobs. They let, 20 million people into the country illegally? Yeah, news, it's not 11. It's 25 million people. And, but you as the small business person, that person who owns a dry cleaner and has 3 employees, you need to be a police officer now and make sure people who are in this country are here legally. It is an absolute crock, and another reason why small businesses struggle in this country, and another reason why the economy is not as robust as it should be. Look, if we don't cut down on these government regulations, and we don't stop small business people from being police officers and enforcing laws that are created, thousands of miles away in Washington, we will never have the robust economy we need to give everybody a decent paying job. Here at BizRap Radio, we're fixing the United States of America through a fundamental concept that individuals pursuing their own economic interests in free markets will create more prosperity for more people than can ever be achieved through government regulations and a planned economy. Yes, it's all about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. We're the people that are fueling this country and making this country great again. At least we hope. It is Mike Manahan, your host, BizRap Radio. We'll be back again next week with another edition of BizRap Radio.